going? It's a Percussion Podcast. I'm Casey Cangelosi. It's episode 268. You're probably listening to this on January 21st. Happy New Year. Big happy 2021. With me, we've got the regular crew. Karli Vina's here. How's it going, Karli?
Hey, Casey, Happy New Year.
Yeah, to you too. You got a New Year's resolution for us or anything?
I'm almost afraid to set any New Year's resolution this year. Like, who knows? Probably so many people had resolutions like, I'm going to travel more and meet new people. And, I don't know. I have some like kind of scaled back, maybe January resolutions this year. Who knows what 2021 is going to bring?
Well, and I know that that's a really good point, and I know we've reported on it in the past. I know I did a pretty extensive report on New Year's resolutions and kind of like the deception behind a lot of them. And it seems like generally the tips to keeping your New Year's resolution is not to go from 0 to 100 on whatever it is. So for instance, if your goal is to exercise more, well, like don't go from 0 days at the gym to 7 a week. Like that's just not realistic. And once you can't keep 7 days, you're statistically what they say is people consider that a failure, and it's actually something called the what the hell effect. Oh, wait, what the hell effect? What
Is
the
that a real thing?
Yeah, no, it really is. What the shoot? Wait, what the hell? Is that right? It
Yes,
basically
I remember that. Yeah.
is that right? But like it just means like, well, I've already screwed up this much. I only went 5 of the 7 days, so I failed. It's like, wait, five days instead of 0 is like amazing. That's
Right.
so good. So yeah, all the advices are keep like small incremental progressive steps. So don't think you're going to be able to go from 10 minutes a day in the practice room to 5 hours, but you might be able to go 10 minutes to 20 minutes. That's like totally realistic. So also here, and actually who made me think of this whole topic because he exercises so well is Ben Charles. What's up, Ben?
Hey, Casey, my resolution is to be as handsome as you.
Thank you. It's this background. It's Pedro's John Psathas concerto. That's that's doing it. Well, I was going to say my New Year's resolution is to get my butt to exercising like you do so well.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. And you're going to give us the news in a minute, but also Ksenija Komljenović is here. What's up, Ksenija?
Hey, Casey. Nothing much here. Just hi, no resolutions. I'm a boring person. Let's move on.
So I shouldn't
No,
prod you
don't
for
probe.
that.
Don't probe. No.
Okay. Well, we'll go to the news, and then why don't you try to make up a resolution just kind of on the fly? So, Ben, what happened today,
And
January
if you don't make up one, we'll make up one for you.
Yeah, I'll edit one in.
Yeah. So as
Edit one
Casey
in.
mentioned,
And for example, it could just be, hey, be nicer to Casey on the podcast.
Oh,
Just
I'll do that. I'll do that. There.
off the top of my head.
So as Casey mentioned, this is being released on January 21st. So a few things from history that happened on January 21st. First of all, in 1936, the Porgy Bess Catfish Rose Suite was premiered for the first time. And we have all played the xylophone excerpt 1,000 times since then, or possibly more. There have been two of the most significant singers of the 20th century were born. In 1941, Spanish tenor and conductor Placido Domingo was born. And in 1976, Emma Bunton was born. Casey knows her by her stage name of Baby Spice from the Spice Girls. In 1987, Aretha Franklin was inducted as the first woman into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And then the one I really wanted to dig into in depth today, in 1899, Alexander Cherepnin was born. Alexander Cherepnin was a composer and pianist. He was raised in an artistic household. His father, Nikolai Cherepnin, was actually a student of Rimsky-Korsakov, and his family home was a meeting place for many musicians and artists of the day. He composed prolifically as a child. He composed over 100 works, including more than a dozen piano sonatas in his teenage years. While he was born in St. Petersburg, he eventually settled with his family in Paris, where he launched an international career as a pianist and composer, where he traveled to the US, Japan, and China. As an adult, he ended up settling in Chicago and taught at DePaul University. His Symphony No. 1, Movement 2, is the first work ever for percussion alone, preceding ionization by 4 years. And there's sort of different metrics for that. Obviously, ionization is a freestanding piece. This is a movement of a symphony. And the catch here is that it does involve the string players actually knocking on the body of their instrument. So it might not actually be considered for percussion alone, but we could say for percussive noises alone. At the time of his death, he also had a symphony in progress that was being written for percussion alone. And in 1939, he wrote a sonatina for timpani and piano, which has also been arranged for orchestra and band by the composer. And I found there are actually recordings of that on YouTube. I've never heard of that as anyone's junior recital piece or anything, but that's a new timpani work to add to our repertoire.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, it's amazing how like ionization is the first piece. No, the Trebnin is the first piece. Like the amount of knife fights I've gotten in the Weston Bar at PASIC is
With who? With who?
Oh, I mean with anybody.
Is that how you met our guest today?
Yeah, with Pedro, with Keith Aleo, with Andy Bliss. I mean, yeah, it's just the scars I have. Well, thanks a lot, Ben. And speaking of our guests, if this episode, if you're all looking at the timeline and it's like 3 hours long, well, that's because Pedro really has a pretty, substantial 3-part career. He's a significant percussionist first and foremost, but also significant composer and conductor. He's got several quintessential solo recordings out there of our percussion pieces, primarily John Psathas and also Yanis Xenakis. His Xenakis recording, the audio CD double DVD, was released in 2004. And I'm actually going to change my background to that CD because this recording was so just influential to me. This was before YouTube. This was 2004. So this is the only way I could see multiple percussion at all. You couldn't just go straight to YouTube and find this. You actually had to take the CD, turn it over, put it in a computer or DVD player to see Pedro's performance of Rebonds. And I still have like the whole thing memorized, and now I still show it to my students all the time in percussion lit and in lessons, so on and so forth. But as a conductor, he's co-founded the Portuguese Chamber Orchestra and the Portuguese Youth Orchestra. He's been a guest conductor with orchestras all over the world, and he's also got just wonderful, wonderful compositions. I hope we can dig into some of those on the episode too. So, Uncle Pedro, how's it going, buddy? It's good to see you.
Hello, how are you all? Thank you for having me. And after that introduction, I think we're pretty much done.
Yeah, sorry. It's always a point of contention. Like, how much other bio do we say? And I could have said a lot more. Yeah.
All the ancient recordings. Today's like a collection of the Baroque or something. But off you go.
Yeah, right. Well, no, man, congratulations on just so much great stuff. Pedro, you're widely known. This episode, we announced this episode, and now it immediately got shared a lot more times than many of our episodes. And I wanted to ask you about just how you became a conductor, first off. Because, we talked to a lot of percussionists on the show. We've talked to, Steve Schick comes to my mind as a conductor, but no, we haven't really talked to conductors, or at least talked to them primarily about conducting. So, I've always thought conductors are kind of a bummer. They're always the person who's like telling me, hey, you're using the wrong mallets, or why are you using that cymbal, or like, hey, you came in wrong. So like they're like not my favorite people in the world. So why did you defect to becoming
so nice
a conductor?
To hear that they're not your favorite people in the world. Actually, it's great you mentioned Steve Schick. Steve came to Lisbon in 2006 or 2007. We did a 24-hour percussive marathon. We played Le Noir et l'Étoile by Griset in that marathon, and he did some recitals. And this was about the point in his life where he started conducting. So we actually spoke a little about this, and I remember him mentioning that it was natural for a percussionist to be a conductor because it's like a multiple percussion setup, kind of made up with instrumentalists. So, and he was kind of pointing out, you have the bongos there, you have the the bass drum and the cymbals or whatever, the triangle, and so it's like a living organism that it is somewhat arranged like a percussion setup, and it has the same fascinating aspect that you have, of course, you have to dose and to help regulate these antagonistic forces, and the people playing very different instruments, as in the same way that you have to do when you're playing a multiple percussion setup. So in that sense, I think percussion is very appealing to conductors, and percussionists are drawn towards conducting because it has that topographical appeal and in that sense. So I've always felt drawn to it, also due to the fact that as a percussionist you can't really play a lot of original music. It was interesting in the introduction you were mentioning, and you know, what was the first percussion piece, so in that sense, there's so much music that we cannot play. Well, we can of course transcribe and have a go at that, but there's all this background of Western classical music and other music that is just not written for percussion. So that was one of the reasons why, with my curious mind, I wanted to explore and see what I could do with it, and mainly what I could learn from it. I think that was my aim, was to realize that in a sense my studies as a percussionist, they weren't really enough for what I was looking for, and to fulfill my curiosity I tried to expand that. So when I was studying in London for my undergrad at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, which was a fascinating place to study. James Wood was the director of the percussion ensemble, and the syllabus was done in a way that was very complete. So you'd play a lot in orchestra, but you'd have at the same time the chance to play all this microtonal stuff. The school actually had a full microtonal vibraphone and some quarter-tone Glock extensions and whatnot. So it was a very wide-ranging 4 years that I had access to. And at some point, there were these composer workshops that they needed conductors or someone to at least beat the time whilst our colleagues were trying to sight read through student compositions, as wild as that can be, especially when someone is learning how to write for an instrument. So I was, for many of these, I just was asked by a composition teacher, hey, you play percussion, so you come and beat 4/4 and keep the tempo. And so I was half decent at that, so they kept having me back to do that. And after a while, I had some colleagues that asked me to come and help them with larger ensembles. And so I think some point in my first year, I went to Allan Azzeldine's conducting class at the school and asked to just watch the lessons and if I can keep up with the program. So during my percussion studies, I did also the subject, the conducting classes with Allan Azzeldine, which has now unfortunately passed away, and was a really fascinating and inspiring and very demanding figure. So I think having, of course, all the orchestral and contemporary percussion together with this conducting classes, that where you had to, learn transposition and go and do Schenker analysis on all this music and play forehand piano and sight read this stuff, and it was something that I really enjoyed doing and helped feed my curiosity for all aspects of music making. Especially, I think it does complete, in a sense, the background that you need as a percussionist, because it's such a wide-ranging thing that at some point you need to search for the roots of how this music is made. So conducting for me was just a way of finding those roots in some deeper way, rather than just doing the percussion studies. That's out of curiosity and interest, really.
Cool. Yeah. Geez, excellent. We usually don't get into the article segment of the show just yet, and don't you like how I'm surprising you with all these, like, oh, there's the article segment, oh, who would have known, I wish someone had told me. But it's totally just conductor related. And I ran into an article, a New York Times article, Allan Kozinn, and it's called "Percussionists Go from Background to Podium." And I guess Allan.
I think I've read this. Yes.
Oh, cool.
I think I've read this. Yes, very interesting, and I think it's along the lines of what I've just kind of discussed here. I think it's I
Oh
think we
yeah.
are equipped in a way to also time, the way you have to organize time. For instance, anyone in a percussion program at any school will know that, well, if you have to set up your multiple percussion piece, then you have to make sure that no one else is using that 14-inch tom or that bass drum or whatever instrument. So you have to know when you set it up, how you set it up, for how long you have it available, and have to plan your practice around these schedules. So I think percussionists are pretty good at organizing stuff, and I think, well, you have this, your amazing career and podcast, and all our colleagues here, that they will know what I'm getting at. I mean, so many percussionists these days organize labels, master classes, summer seminars, all sorts of activities, concert series. So I think percussionists are prone, also because they had to carve a lot of their own way, and finding commissions, finding collaborators, having music transcribed, organized, published, everything. So that's all of these tasks you end up doing as a conductor. So they're all there. I think Allan's article, from what I remember, is a wonderful example of all that.
Pedro, that was like 11 years ago. I don't know how you remember. I can't remember anything from 11 years ago. I'm impressed. You know, he also goes through, and it's come on this show, like exactly what you just said. It's come up on this show several times that percussionists, it ends up being inherently administrative. You know, you end up taking an administrative role. I think it was Ross Carr told us. We've had several orchestral percussionists on the show.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, do you think your music librarian or personnel manager knows where to get church bells, like where to rent? No, of course not. They like go to the principal percussionist, and that's part of their job. So you're already on the phone, you're already organizing things, you're already saying like, oh, actually, we're going to need this kind of truck to move this kind of gear, because
then you also have something super interesting, which is like percussionists, they have no aesthetic prejudice. So you'll see percussionists playing music from, you know, with all seriousness, from a pop music arrangement to the latest avant-garde microtonal piece for which you have to cut I don't know how many different parts of hardware stuff to make work. So I think that's also a very very valuable asset, is that there is no aesthetic prejudice towards either any type of music making or type of music or type of project, and ends up that percussionists are also very supportive usually of each other's projects. So you can easily, I think a fairly recent example was, there was this stream of performances of John Luther Adams' Inuksut. I put up one of them, I think it was around 2011 or 12 in Lisbon. And it was fascinating to see how many people would just go out for free and do this. And it's not only for free, you have to bring your own gear, which is a lot, you know, all these cymbals and drums, and people would go out to the middle of deserts and parks and play this piece for mainly insects and trees and whatever, and passers-by, and still get super excited. By the end, there was no clapping, and because there was already no one there, but just for the sheer joy of this mind-blowing sonic experience. Well, always ends up being with percussion. I think it's wonderful. I think it was Doug Perkins mentioned this at some point in the past, that it's also very community-based. So I think this is something that percussionists were very successful of doing, which was creating a community that is supportive with usually no aesthetic prejudice towards our colleagues' endeavors. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's grown so to such an extent. It's out of that goodwill.
Yeah, Ksenija. Oh, I'm sorry, Karli, we're going to go in order. I'm going to obey the chat.
Good.
So
for once.
Thanks, Casey, for once. So we've talked a little bit about, you mentioned the lack of aesthetic prejudice, kind of open-mindedness to repertoire. What do you think about gesture as it relates? What parts of gesture from your playing do you find relate also to conducting?
My father was now a retired trumpet player, but I remember when I was a child, he used to say that it was interesting in his orchestra to play with different conductors, because their physicality usually came from what instrument they played. So I remember You would, of course, have string players that you would identify from the sweeping gestures, or you'd have pianists, or even a flute player, recorder player. So I think, of course, as a percussionist, it's you're very prone to a certain type of gestures that are, of course, very useful, but you have to expand them in order to accommodate how other players view those gestures. So it's naturally, percussionists would be very good at stuff that is, of course, very rhythmical, very oriented to pointillistic sort of music, or a more rhythmic approach, and that is useful. But then you'll have to find a way in which other musicians perceive that that gesture. So more at the beginning, I would see that the fact that was, and maybe that was very snobbish of me, I would always thought, of course, I'm a percussionist, so my gestures will be very clear, and they'll be, sharp, and everyone, that will just be absolutely no doubt of what I'm asking with this gesture. But it's actually not everyone will perceive this. All musicians will perceive this gesture. So I think one has to expand this this mime that is conducting in a way that is readable and useful to other musicians. But I think it's always, of course, an advantage that you deal with this envelope of the sound that's always about the beginning of the sound. But then, of course, then you have to, because that's also perhaps a negative point of percussion playing, is that we are very attached to the beginning of the envelope, but not so much at the sustain and at the decay. So I think that was where I really had to develop something further than from my playing in conducting, is that of course there's the attack, but then there's, of course, how you sustain and how you decay, and how that relates with everything that's going on. So that has helped immensely or at least I think that has helped immensely to the way I play these days. That's, of course, has been so much influenced by the orchestra and making music with instruments that don't relate to this defined, pointy way that all of us are pretty much wired to think music, around this paradigm. I think it's a very percussive thing. It's useful, of course, but then you have to expand this in a way. With, of course, string players spend such a long time dealing with other aspects of music making that is not to do with the attack part of the envelope. So you have to tune in onto that and know how to get there in a different way, a way that's not, of course, this way that has more to do with that.
Right. One of my favorite things to do in percussion, like a percussion methods course, about the start of the note and how percussion sound is immediate and instant, is to take a bunch of non-percussionists and just ask them, okay, clap on the downbeat, and you go 3, 4. Like, it's just like it's impossible. Anyway, I thought that was a funny story. I see you there, Ben. What do you got?
No, I was like, on the same line. I was thinking it was so funny hearing Pedro say that, because we have a friend, Tyson Voigt, whose wife is a singer, and they have a voice and percussion duo. And they have this great story about one of their first rehearsals together. Tyson picks up a mallet, really quickly to cue her to enter, and Tyson said she just stopped and said, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm cueing you," and she was like, "I'm not going to do that."
So different.
Yeah, but there's I mean, we all, even the other day I was thinking, I mean, we spend such a long part of our lives with music that I think, of course, it would be silly not to realize that it affects everything that you do, even solving, life stuff, you'll see around this prism of music making. And of course, it's not always a rehearsal, and you can't, just have the cellos repeat that passage with a different fingering or whatever, and then you solve your problem with tax or transportation or childcare. But it is fascinating when you realize that, at least it was fascinating for me, that of course percussion is a such a wonderful medium, and it's such a wonderful medium. I truly believe from that way that there is no aesthetic prejudice, and you can keep this childlike enthusiasm all your life for making music with anything. And I think that's really shaped who I am, and I'm proud to be part of this community and proud to be part of this movement. But of course, I think it's helped made me a more complete musician, if that's not the best description of it, but at least from finding what it is to be in someone else's shoes. How is it like to be like you mentioned, Ben, about the singer? What does it feel like to make music or relate in a musical practice in a different way, with a different physicality or a different frame of mind? So I think that's helped me value even more percussion, just getting out of that comfort zone, so to speak, and getting back to it. So it's I find that fascinating, just being able to create music and to organize it and help rehearse it and conduct it and then play as well. So that just helps me value and understand more the process of it all.
It's so wonderful to listen to you speak, Pedro. I wanted to ask, what does it take to start an orchestra? Because obviously you started the Portuguese Chamber Orchestra and the Youth Orchestra. You've co-founded both of these. What does it take? Is it a lot of good friends who are musicians, a lot of good friends who have money to support it? How does it work?
It takes not knowing what it's like to try and do it, because if you know what it's like, then I suppose you wouldn't do it. Well, it takes just an amazing group of people, with my co-founders, with Teresa and Alexander, who are the co-founders of these adventures with me that started back in 2006-07. So at the time, we just wanted to find a way in which we would make use of all the great musicians in Portugal that weren't really playing in orchestras already, were just teaching. And so we just wanted to make use of this wonderful generation of gifted musicians. So that's how that started. But then we quickly realized that once we were doing it, that we could have a positive impact on the social fabric, and music could go a lot further than simply, which is not simply, but just organizing concerts and performing concerts to regular audiences. So now we are in 2021, so we'll be doing this for a while. The project is huge at the moment. It has of course this component of this professional orchestra that performs. It's a project-based orchestra, performs this handful of concerts a year. Then the National Youth Orchestra of Portugal, which we also organize, and represents Portugal in the European Federation of National Youth Orchestras, and it performs an international tour a year, and it basically gathers through national auditions the most exciting young musicians from 14 to 24, approximately, of age. We get together several times a year, usually during school breaks. We also have an ancient music seminar and contemporary music seminar, extra European music seminar. And so it's just like a whole program that also includes body awareness and social work and playing, having usually an associate young composer every year. So it's a complex operation. And then a third part of that work is with our social projects. So we work with children with disadvantaged backgrounds in our area. So we have a very cool orchestra with these children. And we have our own workshop where we build instruments from recycled stuff. We play all sorts of music with them. And we have another project which has been going for over a decade, which is a contemporary music group of people with mental disability. And this is a really fascinating project that has taught us so much, that music can really be a tool for change. So we are gearing more and more towards these practical tools in which music can really affect people's lives, and we are very proud to have been taking this route, and it's made us realize how music and art can really have such a significant impact in the fabric of society. For instance, 2 years ago we had a composition, a piece called Reach by João Godinho, a young composer, that was written is a concerto for an inclusive ensemble. So there's 3 of our musicians that coach some of these musicians with special needs. So this inclusive ensemble, so it's like a big Sinfonia Concertante. It was premiered at the Concerthaus in Berlin during the Young Euro Classic Festival, and it was such a magical experience to see that, you know, at the end of this performance, this world premiere, not only we had tears in our eyes, but the audience was so moved by what they realized, and in fact it was many months of work to have these musicians be there on stage and perform something that they wouldn't have been able to do a few years ago, and just share that moment with this youth orchestra and with this composer and with this audience. And there was, of course, this is so fulfilling to be able to make that happen, and to be there on stage and share that. And going back to our conversation around percussion, I think the percussionist frame of mind helps binding this together. And I wouldn't be able to do this, of course, without this wonderful team of colleagues and friends and team. But at the same time, I think all these percussive experiences that take us out of our comfort zones the whole time, they really help shape our mind to reach to the unknown. And I've seen this often. I mean, percussionists often have no fear of failing. And this is something that I try to cultivate. This sometimes we think, oh, maybe we shouldn't do that. It's too risky. And then my percussionist might say, hey, let's just do it. And if we fail, we fail. We'll just do it again. So I try to listen to when my percussionist mind is there going, yes, you want to do it, and I just go with it. We just do it. Yeah.
It
works out okay. And so if it doesn't, you just, well.
Yeah. Mark Applebaum, composer, was on the show, and he said that something that's so nice about percussionists is they're willing to just try whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, like, are you willing to do this crazy thing? And they're like, yeah, sure. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
absolutely.
Cool.
And I think this is something you have to, maybe this percussionists are good at keeping their child's, you know, this kind of urge that you have on your child. There's something you know isn't really good for you, but you do it anyway. And I think if you nurture this in a good way, it can be helpful. It can, of course, be dangerous, but it's nice that, you know, like going back to like those Inuksut performances, you know, it's cool that people just get out of their daily life and just get their car filled with cymbals and heavy stuff and drive 300 miles to do this performance for insects and nature.
Yeah.
I think this is, I'm not saying it wouldn't be impossible to do with other instrumentalists, but it probably would take a lot more asking.
Well, let me wrap up the conducting portion of this real quick, and what led us to this, which was this nice little write-up by Allan Kozinn. And you know, I just like to tell everyone also, you know, there's several prominent percussionist conductors out in the world. We mentioned Steve Schick, but also William Kraft, famous composer, also has big conducting career. Bill Kraft, Jan Williams, famous percussionist, went on to have a very established conducting career. Jeffrey Milarski is mentioned in the article, and you know, one of my own conductors, Larry Ratcliffe from Rice University, he tours all over and has conducted many many orchestras out in the world. And of course, like the heaviest hitter is probably Simon Rattle. You know, Simon Rattle is a percussionist, and you can actually see him playing timpani. And I saw something, you know, Berlin Phil Digital Concert Hall. He was playing timpani, and I think we've covered really everything in it. But I thought I would just maybe end with the last little quote from the author. He says, "It may take a musician with a percussionist's ear for polyrhythms to make complex works sound eloquent and expressive to listeners who currently resist them, and maybe a generation of percussionists turned conductors will accomplish the renovation of the orchestral canon that is now nearly a century overdue." I thought that was pretty cool, you know,
Nice,
since
nice. I'll have
contemporary
that
music.
framed. That's beautifully put. I wouldn't have said it better myself. So I'll have that framed.
Yeah, right. I think that's a good one. I thought
It's
that was
very optimistic. It's very optimistic. I like that.
Sure, sure. Well, I mean, yeah, modern music is so rhythmic, you know, it's so rhythmic. And I mean, I've heard composers say all the time, you know, the exact specific notes are secondary now to the rhythm. You know, it's so much more about the rhythmic layering and the
In
rhythmic
the same
texture.
sense,
And
it's
if,
also contemporary music is so much also to do about sound and of just having people do something out of their comfort zone. So and percussionists are good at convincing other musicians to get out of their comfort zone. So I think it's a very optimistic quote, very optimistic quote. I'm not sure how far that will go, but it's something to have, you know, to have framed in your office, and when you're feeling down, you'll look up to that and try to put that into practice. Absolutely.
Pedro, it's so funny hearing you talk about performing Inuxuit for insects, and I was sitting here in my own head thinking, what is the most money that I've ever paid to perform something? And I won't say my number, but I'm sure we all have our number. But Pedro, and a different topic I wanted to ask about. Casey mentioned your Xenakis recordings that are so amazing. I've also been so floored by your recordings of the music of John Psathas, who I know is a composer that you've had a long working relationship with. Could you tell us about what drew you to the music of John Psathas and some about your collaboration?
Well, John is such an amazing musician and composer and person, really. So it's such a joy to have worked with him in so many different projects. He's a self-professed closet percussionist, so he really gets. I think he really gets what it's like to not only to write for percussion, but it feels like playing percussion. So I think it's very natural for him. And there's also a handful of composers I can think that have that extra mile of knowing what it feels like in the skin to play the pieces. So it's always a joy to work with him. Of course, his music is very intricate, and I had to. It's always fascinating when you do a premiere of a piece, because you are. I mean, it hasn't been played before, so you have to find your way of playing it. I think it's interesting to see how a piece like One Study is kind of exploded all over the world. And I have some interesting stories about that piece. I mean, when it was written, he wanted to explore using some extra percussion sounds, and I had a very fancy mini disc recorder at the time with a microphone. So I was kind of in a rush, and he asked me in an email if he had some sounds that I could send to him. So I had some junk sounds in my studio that I recorded just like that. I just picked the microphone and went, oh, meow, then dong, and then next one. And there were 16. So I think it's 16. He sampled these and use them in the piece. So I am glad that I didn't sample any more of these sounds. And so every time I have questions about this piece, I always find it. Sometimes I remember what the original looked like and how we got to the end version, because of course I presume you've all been involved in working with composers, and often when you get the first version of the piece isn't completely playable yet. So getting to the end result of this piece I'm kind of proud that I helped carve the piece in an help edit it in a way that it now can be fully enjoyed by players all over the place. But it was a challenging piece to tame and perform as it is to anyone that wants to play it today. But it's always fun to be in the process, as with this piece, and all of the pieces that have been involved. And of course, you get some of the commissions. You are involved in workshopping and playing. Some of them you just get them, through the mail, and you play them, and there's little to do. So it's always fascinating, this degrees of involvement that you have with each composer. And of course, with John, he always ends up, the final result the first print that you get is already extremely polished, and it's always extra fun to try and make this music jump off the page. And in John's case, it's super difficult because his music is very, very demanding and virtuosic and fast and all that stuff.
Yeah, I love that closet percussionist term you used about him, and we had him on the podcast a while back, and hear him talk about how into Dave Weckl he is, and he's transcribed Dave Weckl and used that as an influence in his music. And I just remember when I was in grad school, I played his piece Matra's Dance, and it has dotted 16ths in it, and that's a rhythm you encounter in 6/8 a lot, but in 4/4 I really had to think about what does that even mean, and figure out how to space those out.
He also has an interesting way of composing. I don't really know many composers that use that. He first does these mock-ups in Logic. So he first writes a MIDI version, then he kind of transcribes this MIDI version. So he works in a different way. So he gets the sound, the piece to sound like he wants it to sound, and then he jots it down in paper. I think this is he's found his unique way of working. And of course, I think that's also very related to some sort of closet percussionist, because this detailed MIDI, these renditions, they're very vivid, and they're super. They do celebrate this attack part of the envelope. It's of course you hear the MIDI recordings, and I'm sure we've all done that. It's like, oh my God, how close to this can I get? And always very dangerous, this MIDI. Very depressing. Don't you get depressed when you get these MIDIs? And then
but some of them are so good now. If it's
I love the tom-tom sounds, and there's a doo, doo, doo,
doo, doo. They're half
I
laser.
remember these first MIDIs, actually. I still have some cassettes laying around. It was from the times I was studying in London in the early 90s, and I met Alejandro Vingau. He'd only written Tumblers and the Marimba Concerto, which I've learned during my first year. That's how I met him, and I ended up helping him edit the piece as a student. And he was doing these training cassettes, as they were called. I still have some lying around somewhere. And this was brilliant because you would just basically rewind the tape and have a go and stop and do it again, and finding a way of really accurately learning a piece without having to kind of guess all these complicated rhythms. So I was a big fan of those. Of course, things have evolved, but I think it was a step that, and again, percussionists were game for it. Would you like a training cassette? And a percussionist would just say, yeah, why not? Just let's have a cassette, and if it helps me get that 7 across 5/16, why not? And it's another one of those milestones that I think we helped achieve in some way.
It's interesting. When you come to mind, for me, it's very much that, of course, that Xenakis audio DVD that I had since I was younger and listened to so much, but also, yeah, it's John Psathas's music, it really comes to my mind, and it's maybe, a takeaway for young percussionists to maybe listen to, when you're considering, what your sound and your identity and your performance presentation is going to be. Yeah, think about that when you're commissioning composers. Is there a specific kind of identity that might cement who comes to mind when you perform. Because it's of course not John Psathas who comes to mind, but it's very much his sound and his music and pieces like One Study, One Summary. It's like that's Pedro to me.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, it's cool. I was also going to say, it's funny you mentioned these MIDI mock-ups, and I said, well, they're so good now. But speaking of how John Psathas said he composes and how he does do so much with tape and everything, it is interesting how like that old MIDI language that still sounds so bad sometimes. It's still what we use. Like virtual instruments, you load up the virtual instrument and you still control it all with the same old-fashioned MIDI data.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how much that
incredible
has stuck
language,
around.
Yeah. Again, it does celebrate a lot of this attack paradigm, which can be kind of dangerous at times. But on the other sense, I still like working with people that write by hand, and we get a lot of our students to do some transcriptions also by hand when possible, because it's a different way of relating to just getting out of technology and just working with the page.
Yep.
I think is interesting in that sense, and you'll see that in some sense also technology has biased a lot of the percussion composition. It's very difficult these days to get a piece that it's unplayable or offers problems that take a lot of imagination to solve, like some of the sections of Psathas by Xenakis, or even with the section B of Reborn, where so many people have different solutions, with the stacked wood blocks, or with different ways of playing with 3 mallets, 2 mallets, or whatever. So of course there's this side of the coin where things have advanced with such an incredible extent, but at the same time I think the excessive use of certain tools can and people have written, and academics have written about this, and how much notation software and other tools have kind of skewed the musical language. And I think percussion has been a particular victim of that trend, because we are so incredibly just enthusiastic at anything that is new, and we just take advantage of it. So I think it's to be used, of course, with, I'm not saying that we should all go back and get pigeons to transport our manuscripts, handwritten manuscripts, all over the continents, but I think there are some traditions that are interesting to explore, and going back to different states. A lot of percussion music was written, was actually very difficult to be performed, or impossible to be performed, and I think out of that necessity, a lot of many ingenious players found incredible solutions. So I think this is something that we should continue to celebrate, and of course embracing the new trends, but still not forgetting that maverick outlook that makes us these sonic cowboys that we are.
Sonic Cowboys.
Another one that we have to frame.
There are some gems in this episode.
Pedro, I'd like to hear from you a little bit about all the ways that you've envisioned the marimba sound to improve. I've seen, obviously you're an inventor, so the marimba damper pedal is attributed to you. I'd love to hear about that. But I also saw you play a 6-octave marimba once, and I'd love to, the recording is very old, so I couldn't really quite hear the quality of the sound.
This was in Mexico. I didn't invent this. This was with Israel Moreno in Chiapas. There's these old and beautiful 6-octave F to F marimbas. But yeah, that was fun. That was.
Does the Mexican marimba, are the accidental keys stacked how we're used to at like a diagonal, or because
Some are, yes, some are.
I've heard that the act like C sharp is directly above C instead of like offset.
Yeah, there are some. I'm in a way specialist. I did visit the Nandayapa factory and all the wonderful friends there in Mexico. It's a wonderful tradition. I was in the Chiapas University. I was greeted by this marimba concert with the students. They were fabulous. They were brilliant. But about invention, I think we all invent stuff because percussion is always about. I mean, we all have our projects that we try to do and snip bits of our fingers trying to come up with some extension of something. The marimba pedal is something that was like most of my projects was never done and is always a work in process. I mean. The damper pedal is something that I haven't really kept exploring because from the technical standpoint, I no longer have partners to explore that with. But it got to a really, really interesting point at the time with Majestic Holland that I greet. I mean, they were sports. They were superstars. They really spent money on this, and we did many, many cool things at the time, especially with Peter Wupperhorst, who was superb at just trying to make things happen in that way. So we made a few of these. I think there was at least a couple in the US. There was one in Taiwan. There was a couple in Europe. There was a few of them. I've played with them in various parts of the world, even with the Los Angeles Philharmonic for the premiere of Peter Liebeson's concerto that I did nearly a decade ago. We used this marimba with the damper pedal. It's interesting. It brings many possibilities, of course, to do with after the attack, with the decay and sustain. So this is the reason why I was so tuned to this at the time, and still am, is that you can control length, and ring length is something that usually does not disturb marimba players or percussionists because we are used to it. But once you start playing with other instrumentalists, for which they in their practice do control this parameter, it becomes an untamed parameter. So, of course, then it's always bugs me that if you have something written that is in some musical language, in some score where this is specified, then you just ignore that you can control this parameter. Of course, it's very difficult to control with the mallets. So often I will use hips, hands, whatever, to control this as possible also with mallets. With the pedal, what you can do, of course, it works like a vibraphone pedal, but the opposite way. So what you can do, you cannot control different registers, but you can control the length. So it means that you'll be able to mime some sort of portato playing and add some extra expression to it. I've seen also some colleagues that were very angry and told me this was very unmusical, but usually I used to say, if you don't like it, you don't touch it, because the pedal was just there and you didn't have to do anything. You just play your marimba as it was, and then if you wanted anything, you could damp, and there was various degrees of damping. You could just hardly touch the bars to pressure, to extreme dead stroke. So I think this is something that at some point I might revisit and create version 3 or 4. And as it was, I think it worked pretty well. It could be, of course, be improved, but it was already something that I used in a couple of recordings, and it could it showcased that it was really possible to do because we did it. So it was a fascinating experiment, yes.
I think it works. I played on one. It's cool.
It is cool.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, you don't touch it.
Yep.
Oh, I had some incredible reactions like, why you did this? Why? This is so unmusical. It's like, don't touch the pedal. Just play marimba. Good. That's fine. Don't touch it. If you don't like it. So.
I imagine it must take some getting used to if it's the opposite action of a vibraphone pedal, which, we're all used to.
Yeah, I mean, like everything in life takes getting used to. I think it's it's easier than it seems, because it's actually pretty natural action. You just press for the sound to dim. So it's actually pretty fast getting used to it. I never had any.
Yeah, I've played pedal glocks like that too. Pedal glocks often operate like that, not like a component. Yeah, it's.
Yeah.
I think yeah, I was thinking about that too, Karli, and I thought it made sense to do it in the way, yeah, you press the pedal down and that causes it to mute, opposite of a vibraphone where you press the pedal down and that causes it to ring, only because the state of the marimba we're used to is that of you don't press anything and it rings.
Wow.
And we're also used to like Pedro said, dampening with hips or mallets or hands, like hit, and then if you want it to mute, you got to do something.
Yeah.
So
Right.
in that sense, it's like, okay, I want it to mute, I have to do something, as opposed to a vibraphone where it's like, I want it to
Absolutely
ring,
right.
I have to do something. So you're kind of taking advantage of the performer's natural state, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely right. Do you want to? We just should partner on this. So you write the brochure. No, but that's I'm kidding. But that's the case, because the natural state of the marimba, as you so pointedly said, Casey, it's that of ringing. So you want to induce an action of controlling that ring. So it's something that you just do very naturally, and it's of course not a requisite to be doing it the whole time, or to having music written for it. You actually will find a way in which you will naturally will want to do it. And the effect that I thought that was most interesting was that by controlling the ring length, when you were letting the instrument ring naturally, it psychoacoustically in some way you'd feel that it rang longer, because that wasn't its natural state. And this goes back to, I had a lesson with Chiara Banchini, which is a Baroque violinist, Swiss Baroque violinist, and I played some Bach for her on the marimba, and she was warning me, look, I don't really know anything about percussion on the marimba. And so she said some amazing things. The first was that, how can you tune your instrument? It's horribly out of tune. The first one. And I said, I cannot, I'd have to chop things. Yes, but how can you play with other people? This is horrible. That was the first thing she said. So that's nice, absolutely right. And then once I started playing some of the low notes, she was saying, but it's horrible that you play a G and I hear a B, you know, an octave in the 10th above.
Right.
And this is horrible. So if you play G minor, I hear a natural B natural on 2 octaves up. How can you play with other people with an instrument that's out of tune and has this stupid harmonic? That's the second one. And then the third one was, how can you stop that thing from ringing? It's getting on my nerves, and the harmony has already changed, and I can hear the notes going. And so from that lesson, she told me 3 things that are really, that if we think of this systematically, these are things that we all hear, but we learn to disconnect, because that's the idiosyncrasy of the instrument. So it is true the instrument is out of tune. It is true the bass notes have an harmonic that is basically unusable for half the keys that we play in. And it rings wildly in ways that we are usually just let the instrument go. So I find this, going back to the conducting and dealing with other ways of hearing sounds and music, very useful to feeding my own thoughts about what we hear. And what we hear is always very biased by our experience. So I think I thank Chiara Banchini for this harsh, not that it was harsh, it was just very, very plain spoken and saying, look, it's out of tune, that harmonic is horrible, and can you damp the instruments with something, with your feet, hands? The harmony has already changed, and I hear the A flat. And
did she like your playing at all, or did she just hate on it?
I don't remember. She probably thought that I sucked, but that doesn't matter, because that was so important that she fed that information right there, that was brilliant, because I needed to hear that. And of course, she'd been hearing to harpsichords and traversos and violins and cellos the whole week, and then comes this guy with this thing, and that was very useful. So I think many of these, even the types of mallets and ways that I play, I think they're fed by this curiosity of listening beyond my experience and beyond my ears, basically. So that's why my impetus for inventions comes from that, I suppose.
Well, it's a very honest assessment of the instrument, actually. We can't argue with any of those points.
No, I think it's the beauty of the instrument is also part of these beautiful imperfections. I think it's this amazing. It's basically a tree resonating with air through this pipe. It's such a beautiful metaphor of nature. It has its quirks, and you just have to find ways of bringing them out when necessary and dealing with them in an informed way. It's this beauty of information. You can. It's like the pedal. Don't press it if you don't like it. You know.
There it is. Absolutely. Well, Pedro, I have a question for you. I was on your website and I read a review that you had there that is beautiful and glowing, but I have to ask you if you remember what piece it was about or what program. The review says marimba player Pedro Carneiro, who performed as a soloist, appeared to be a Superman from another galaxy. So I'm wondering what that was about. What a cool review.
I think this was from a concert in the Berlin Jazz Festival with the Michael Mantler Marimba Vibe Concerto. This is back in mid-2000s. This is a really cool project that we recorded in that week for ECM. Michael Mantler is an Austrian trumpet player that is a trumpet player, composer, band leader, that writes music. It's hard to pinpoint. It's music comes from jazz and avant-garde music, and very exploratory. So he had this cool project that was the concerto. So basically, it was like an orchestra made up of a bunch of soloists that played different concertos during this whole evening, but they all played in each other's concertos. So I played marimba vibe also in the guitar concerto and in the other piano concerto, and so this is a wonderful project. I think it was 2006 or 7, if I remember correctly. Yeah, Michael Mantler, very good guy. He lives in Copenhagen, yeah, and lived in America also for many years. He's a citizen of the world. Yeah. And it was a piece for stacked, I remember now, yeah. So it was a piece for stacked vibraphone and marimba, very hard. So vibraphone, then marimba, a lot of this stuff.
That's where the Superman arms come
Superman.
from.
Probably.
That's probably this reviewer. This reviewer, Karli, was just like, I don't know what the heck to say. I don't know anything about percussion and music. He had his arms out. He
was like this, so he must be Superman.
Yeah, exactly. I guess. I don't know. My job sucks.
His playing sucks, but yeah.
Instruments horribly out of tune, harmonics totally unusable.
Right. Yeah, when are one of these going to come up in a review? Like, yeah, the performer hit a G, but I heard a B flat. I don't know what this. Yeah. Well, hey, we have a question from Instagram from Ishmael. I think his last name is Ash, Ishmael Ash. So hi, Ishmael. Thanks. Looks like he's writing in from Barcelona, Spain. And if I understand this right, I think he's just asking for, your general advice to a percussionist, a young percussionist who wants to, have a career like your own. I know you just got wide-eyed and terrified. What could we say?
Oh. Well, everything now is so much geared towards, everyone now has to put stuff out there. So everyone has all sorts of social media channels, and recordings are no longer hip. Now you do videos with multiple cameras and all this stuff. And so what could I say? I don't know, just put your heart out there, and just, for any of us, just do the stuff that you really like and do it with other people and share it passionately. I mean, I don't know. Often I see that if you're driven by this, if you're driven by your own curiosity and urge, then you don't have to be like anyone else. And I often see, of course, there are so many wonderful young players, but they're driven by sometimes they're partly driven by the goal of being like someone else, like I suppose like we all are at a certain age. And it's just encouraging them to finding their own way. I mean, we don't all have to be the same, and it's good that we are not all the same, and it's good that we're all different, and in the same sense, it's just trying to, even as a teacher, it's just trying to find ways of nurturing who you are, and finding information that will help you celebrate who you are and your uniqueness. And I think that's the beauty of it. Is also one of the dangers of this, of everything, the fact that now we are able to put everything out there. You just record anything and just put it out there. It's also always dangerous because it's difficult to sieve through what is, not that I want to say that there are things that worth more than others, but in that sense I'm saying it's difficult to find a path these days. There's so much information, I suppose, and it's tough for young players, and there's so many people. I mean, percussion is so cool, so hip. Everyone wants to have a career, and but what is it to have a career? I don't know. Just be out in the world and play concerts? Is that a career? I ask you.
Well,
I don't know. I mean, isn't it possible to have a career if you work with music therapy, or create an organization that uses music towards other goals than presenting concerts? I think music is so much, music can offer. I learned this late, and I'm very happy that I've learned this late. I mean, I think we live in a time that it's already, days are gone that you could say that, oh, my biggest experience was to be in the, this stage, very famous stage. Now put your whatever favorite venue is, playing with whatever favorite orchestra in the world is, playing for the whatever favorite label is. I think you can have a really interesting life as an artist, doing that, of course, but many other things, and not everyone has to feel that they've achieved something through those channels only. So, of course, it's hard to steer this young musician that's, yes, but I want to play Can Variations in Carnegie Hall by next year with, it's just finding ways of opening, keeping the percussion mentality, just in that, like Ben was saying about spending money, how much money have I spent? I was thinking that how much money have I spent playing just ridiculous projects that I knew I would just waste money, but I did it anyway, and it was great. And they were perhaps some of the best projects that I've done, and they were complete utter failures, but they had to be done. And
well, and Ishmael, I would just add, to add to Pedro's point, I think the more people we've interviewed on this show, the more we realize, like, the surface that you see of an artist, they're much more diverse and much more eclectic, and it's like my John Psathas example. Like, that's kind of the stamp I hear when I think of Pedro, but he does so much more. And we haven't even talked about him as a composer yet. I mean, Pedro's music sounds nothing like John Psathas's music. It sounds nothing like some of this other music that he plays so much. So it's and we've had that before too. Like, I remember we had when we had Alejandro Viñao on, it was really fun to dig deep into his works outside of his percussion works, which, gosh, they are so much better in my opinion. I mean, his percussion works are great, but his other works are so good. I used to say the same thing about Gordon Stout too. I mean, Gordon Stout's compositions outside of his marimba compositions are just really fantastic, and I think they're really, really different from his marimba compositions. So, yeah, like I
the
mean, I
dangers of
completely agree.
exposure, you know, it's one of the dangers of exposure, and of course then, yeah, it's but then, you know, young people, they yeah, you know, you do, he will do our this young gentleman that's asked for advice. He will do what he has to do in any case, because that's what you do when you're young. You just don't care what people say. You'll just go and do your own thing. And I mean, it's what it is. I'm always very uncomfortable around these questions, because it's what can you have to be careful on how you gear people towards. I mean, the music business is it's scary that you call it the music business, you know. So it's always I still find it gives me the chills when you put music and business, the music business. It's the industry. I mean, you know, the percussion industry, or whatever. You know, I find these expressions rather terrifying. But you know, it's my point of view. Of course, we all have to live within this realm. But it's we go back to this percussive spirit that we discussed at the beginning. I think it's a nice impulse, and in that sense, perhaps it's we try that with our students too, to show them. There's this wonderful book by what is his name?
Beethoven.
Not Beethoven, but
Okay.
he wrote some wonderful books.
That was just
A guy called Francois. It's a book that was written, I think, in the early 90s or late 80s, that has a list at the end of all Jean-Charles Francois, I think that's his name, and he has a list of pieces written up until that moment. It's fascinating, because you'll get this anthology and say, you know, the best percussion solos written up until 1990 or whatever it is. And I show this to students, and it's interesting that they don't know most of these pieces. They know 3 or 4 of them. So perhaps it's interesting to go back to some of this spirit that generated these impossible pieces and feed some onto this.
Well, Pedro, I had one kind of last off-topic question here. You know, in your bio, you studied with Lee Howard Stevens, who is a name that I think all American percussionists are very familiar with. But you also studied with Silvio Gualdo, who is not a name that I think most people are familiar with unless they've taken like a graduate percussion literature class. And he's actually been someone I've tried to research, but he's sort of a hazy figure in our field, it seems, for no good reason. I mean, outstanding, amazing person with what he's done with Xenakis. So could you tell us about your studies with him and, I don't know, just a little more about him?
Yeah, I studied with him in '92 during this amazing summer seminar that was called the Centre Cante, which was done in the south of France. And they would organize this around composers. So they would have people like, you know, Gérard Griset and Harrison Birtwistle and Xenakis or whatever, these super incredible figures that would be 3 weeks in the south of France and teach you composition analysis, whatever. And then you'd have lessons with these players, in my case with all the percussion. It was a really mind-blowing experience. I spent this summer learning tsiklus and having lessons every day in the afternoon with him. And I remember my first lesson, he basically said, okay, your setup is no good. Let's just clear the room and start again. And I thought,
You can have a lot of these moments.
It's always so easy when your teacher's like, yeah, let's flip all the multi-instruments around everywhere.
it was completely. So I worked really hard. I remember I worked so hard that my back kind of paralyzed and I had to go to his osteopath. And so I just did to my back. and I was kind of paralyzed for like a couple of days, and then I could resume my practice. So for the end of that seminar, I played Ziegler's live in this concert, which was recorded by the Radio France. It was brilliant. I was super nervous and excited, and I was so happy that he celebrated my hard work by giving me this opportunity. And then after this time, I wanted to get a flight back to Portugal. They were on a flight, so I took a train. I still remember this. I was like 2 days in a train, just thinking about this exciting experience. He's a larger than life individual, so he was very inspiring because he was so charismatic, and he would just grab your sticks and show you how very flamboyantly, but with a kind of physicality that you know came from working with these composers. So about gesture, about sound, and just attitude around the setup. He moved like an actor around this room, and so teaching was some sort of performance as well. So, but look, I was 17, 18 at the time, and it was so inspiring it just kind of fueled me to work for a few years, from the summer. It was, it was an exciting time. It was a kind of life-changing moment to have seen this. And of course, coming from a country where we would have very little access to instruments, So by getting there and seeing these large percussion ensembles, these colleagues playing these percussion ensemble pieces with just a rehearsal room full of percussion, it was like, wow, and just of course then sharing and knowing, of course, being in a country, having to speak French and having people from different parts of the world, and it was these moments are always so inspiring when you are young, curious, and eager, which is what I try to keep doing apart from the young.
Cool. Geez. Well, everyone, I just want to play us out real quick with some of Pedro's music, because we didn't even get to talk about that yet. And the piece I chose was called Book of Spirals. And I guess that's more than a piece, isn't it? That's like a whole one scene. It's one
Isn't
single.
that an improvisation? That was an improvisation.
It's all improvisation. I was going to ask.
I think that's all improvised. I think it was recorded in this room, actually. I think it's a quintet, right? This is like violin, viola, cello. Yeah. This is just from that was done with a bunch of sonic cowboys.
Sonic Cowboys. Well, it's
jam. We just put the microphones on and we just play.
It's wonderful though. I mean, it's viola, cello, bass, piano, and marimba with quarter tone extension, which I thought just added. It was such a neat. I've never thought of that. Like, what if you did have quarter tone? I mean, there's so much strings can do, and of course all the other instruments can do with bending notes and finding quarter tones and
playing out of tune.
Playing out of tune, playing out of tune is such a characteristic of modern music, and I just thought, what a cool idea to implement some quarter tone bars, inside of it.
It works nicely with the strings, and free improvisation it's such also a wonderful experience to feed your mind to working with other musicians, with composing with. It's so cool, and you just put the microphone on and try and create some composition, just listening to whoever's playing and finding a common language, finding a common ground. It's so exciting.
Well, and it really struck me as like I described before, this is so different. I just love this, and I haven't heard anything quite like it. So if you're listening on YouTube and all you hear is a big block of silence, I'll just apologize, because that means that we got flagged and YouTube's algorithm took it out, but I'm just going to roll the dice and go for it. So here's just a minute or so of this Book of Spirals from Pedro Carneiro. that only a minute. Of course, I went a little further, but yeah, man, congratulations. It's just really, really nice stuff.
Thank you. It's interesting to hear this. It was recorded in this room, and now it's coming through the internet via your system back to this room. It's
Hey, it's that piece. It's that Alvin Lucier piece. I'm sitting in a room. Guys, thanks so much, Ksenija, Ben, Karli, all the doctors in the room, and Pedro. Man, it's great to see you, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Sure. And man, we'll I'm sure we will have you again. This podcast is gonna last till the end of time, so we'll have to have you on again sometime. So, all right, everybody, take it easy. Happy New Year.
Thank you.